don't be overwhelmed by everything that you have to go through. And, this is going to take some significant time out of your personal life probably. So just, understand that going into this process and just be patient with it.
Welcome to another episode of the CPA Exam Experience podcast from SuperfastCPA. I'm Nate, and in today's interview, you're going to hear me talk with Jonathan. So with Jonathan's story, he started the CPA exam back in 2017. He got really close on his first attempt, but he put in a huge amount of time and effort into studying. And once he found out that he failed that first attempt, he was pretty burnt out from how much time and effort he'd been putting in along with working. And so he just kind of put the CPA exams on the back burner. Now, the thing I really like about Jonathan's story or this interview is that when he came back around the second time, he made balance a priority above all else, meaning he made it a point before he started the second time with the CPA exams that he was still going to have a social life, he was still going to do things that he enjoyed doing, and he was still going to work out, just so that he had this sense of balance and his whole life wasn't work and then study, which, is something I talk about a lot. It's worth pointing out, though, that is only possible if you really have your study process nailed down so that in a 2-hour study session, you're having these very effective study sessions where you're getting a lot done. The classic thing I like to say is when you really have your study process nailed down and you're highly efficient, you can get more done in 2 hours than someone studying 4 to 5 hours the normal way. The other thing with Jonathan that you'll hear is that to support this balanced lifestyle, meaning spending less time sitting in front of his review course, he used our study tools on our app a lot. And he just talks about the benefits of that, how he could be listening to the audios whenever he was driving. Before a meeting started, he could get through 3 or 4 mini quizzes. He would read the review notes. Just once you start using the study tools on your phone, it's really easy to fit in a lot of extra high-quality study time just as you go throughout your normal day. So as you'll hear Jonathan describe, if you do this 2 hours in the morning and then you use the study tools all throughout the day, you fit in another 1 or 2 or 3 extra hours of study time in addition to your morning study session. And so by the time you're done with work, you've put in a very high quality day of studying and you still have your evenings free to have a social life, go to the gym, just do the things that give you that sense of balance so that you're not feeling like your entire life is just work and then study. So before we get into the interview with Jonathan, of course, I just need to mention our free 1-hour study training webinars. That is where we walk you through the 6 key ingredients to a highly effective and efficient study process. When all 6 of these things are present in some form in your daily and weekly process, it's honestly hard to go wrong with your CPA study. So the link to those trainings will be down in the description of this video, or if you're just listening to the podcast version, it will be in the description of the episode as well. So with that out of the way, let's get into the interview with Jonathan. Central Time, where are you located?
I am in San Antonio, Texas, so no snow on the ground over here. It's about 70 degrees out right now, so pretty nice weather.
Yeah, that's really cool. So is it, if you have 70 now, it's extremely hot in the summer then?
Yes, it is. It's usually probably mid to high 90s into the hundreds even, like over the summer. So it's pretty warm. So we have about a 2-month window where it's usually nice golfing weather, and that's about all we get. So.
And that's right now?
Yeah, usually from about now till like end of April or so is pretty nice.
Okay. So yeah, in Utah we have, Utah's like divided in two. You're up here in the mountains in Salt Lake, and if you drive 3 hours down to St. George, that's where all the red rock, similar to the Grand Canyon, but you go down, 2,000 feet. And it's awesome right now. It's like 60s. So I go down there and golf like 2 or 3 times in the winter. But then in the summer, it hits 100 plus. So anyways, pretty similar.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you listened to any of these other interviews? Do you kind of know how these go?
I've listened to several, and actually, to be honest, I got certain tips of how to study from those interviews. So they were helpful. And, I definitely had seen some interviews prior to this, and I thought about different things that I did differently that were applicable to, hopefully, to other people using this study program.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll get into all that. That's one thing, doing all these interviews. Every person has like several things that are just kind of, a unique version of the study strategies or whatever. But then I've done enough of these episodes where people will be like, yeah, so this episode I got this tip, and for some reason it was just like, I don't know, something someone said 6 months later speaks directly to somebody else. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so I started studying like December of 21. So it's been about 14 months or so since I started. And at that time, I listened to probably 3 or 4 different episodes just to, I wanted to see what people were doing, what was the best practice, I guess, for how it worked for them. Once I started kind of getting my study habits going and taking these exams, I didn't pay attention as much at that point just because I kind of already had like what was working for me, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's okay. Kind of been
okay. Yeah. So usually I just kind of refer back to just to kind of start what you wrote on the little form. So let me pull this up. Okay. So you just said SuperfastCPA was extremely helpful to me in my study process. Did you have a period when you first started where, you were just kind of doing the normal way, grinding through each lesson, like video lecture, chapter, or did you find us before you even started?
So, interestingly enough, I mentioned that I started studying back in December of 2021. However, that was kind of my second time starting up the CPA process. So I actually graduated with my master's degree in the fall of 2017. And so I sat for FAR in March of 2018, and I got like a 72, and it was kind of like a transition point in my life. And, I started a new job and everything kind of got pushed to the back burner. But getting back to Superfast, there was a lady in my office who had used it prior to me getting my CPA materials. And so I think there was like a Black Friday special back in like 2017. And so I purchased whatever package it was back then. And so I was actually using that kind of alongside with my Wiley product back then. So I would use it kind of just in conjunction. I would do those 5-question quizzes. I would look at the written notes. I would actually print those out in a binder because I kind of liked looking at them as a hard copy rather than electronically. Sometimes it was easier to highlight little things or make a little notation off to the side. And then I even used the audio notes. I think in the form that I submitted for this interview, I think I mentioned how I would use the audio notes a lot when I was exercising or going to the gym or something, just to kind of reinforce those principles that you had been going over, I guess. So. Okay.
So back in what'd you say? Obviously 2017. Was that right when you were done with your master's and you just started the CPA exams originally?
Correct. So I started studying like right around Christmas time of 2018 because I graduated in 2017. I graduated in December, and so right around Christmas time was when I started studying for FAR. And so I think that what was different about me and my journey is obviously, there was about a 4-year gap before I started studying again. And so because of that, I kind of forced myself to go back through like those Wiley lectures, and I would go through each video lecture and do the corresponding assessment just because not everything was so relevant and recent to me. And a lot of these people, I'm sure, are probably just getting out of their master's degrees or whatever. And so a lot of this information is probably pretty recent that they've gone over. And so they might be able to hammer out multiple choice questions and kind of learn that way. But I was almost starting from scratch again 4 years later. So that was probably something that's a lot different for me than it is for other people going on right now.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, but going back to 2017, so what happened with that whole thing? You studied for a few months or, I don't know, a year or something, and then you failed one exam, or what was that whole thing? What led to the 4-year break?
So as I mentioned, I started studying around Christmas time of 2017, and then I had scheduled in early January, I scheduled my exam for, I think it was the first week of March for FAR. And I mean, I was just new to the whole process at that point, so I wasn't sure like what was going to work for me specifically or what was the best way to go about it. And I mean, looking back, I probably, compared to what I've done recently to pass 3 exams at this point, I guess I didn't put in as much effort as I needed to. A lot of it too was since I started studying again, I upgraded my Wiley package to include like the test bank to where I could just, hammer out multiple choice questions for each section. I didn't have that capability the first time, and I think that made a huge difference this time around, just to keep going over that. But in terms of the gap, so as I mentioned, I got a 72, and I was close. If I had retaken that within about a month, I bet I would have passed. But I was starting a new job at that point, and then I was just kind of burnt out a little bit at that point, because I went straight from undergrad. I finished my undergrad when I was 21 years old, went straight into grad school and started working, and then finished grad school and started studying for CPA exam, and then I got a 72 and started a new job right then. And I was kind of burnt out, and so I wanted to have some life experience. I wanted to travel and live, I guess. And I just kept pushing it off until one day I realized if I want to really move forward in this profession, I absolutely need to have that. And so I just knew that this was something that I needed to pursue at some point.
Yeah And that's a big point. Kind of you don't know what you don't know. Like when someone starts this process, there's I don't know, that comes up a lot in like support emails. I don't know, it's like they don't I can just tell when we get an email and they're talking about certain things, or like, why doesn't it have this, or this feature, and it's kind of like, well, or the big thing is, a lot of times people like get our program and it's not clear that it's like they think it's a replacement for Becker or something, like the main review course.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's clear, like, well, okay, I know you're not deep into this process if you're kind of asking that question, because our whole thing is solving the big 3 problems that the review course alone presents. Like the overwhelm with the amount of information, finding the time to study. That's what our study tools solves, kind of like you mentioned. And then the whole retention thing, just constantly hitting things over and over. But yeah, you kind of have to someone has to kind of start the process and attempt this to even kind of realize what the issues with the study process are. I think that's kind of what you were saying.
Exactly. It's a trial by error kind of thing. Once you start getting through it, you realize what works for you specifically, and then you kind of have that same approach as you're finishing out your exams.
Yeah. Okay, so a few years go by, you realize you need to finish your CPA, so you come back to it, and what was your process then?
So I upgraded my Wiley package to, I don't know what the terms are, but I got like the platinum package that includes all the study material, the spiral notebooks, the flashcards, and the test bank items, so you can just really drill down or drill into multiple choice questions throughout the day. So I upgraded that initially, and then because it had been several years since I had been studying, I really went through each and every lesson for every exam. So I started with FAR the first time again, and I went through all the video lectures, and FAR has quite a bit of material, so it took probably about a month and a half to go through all of those video lectures. And then once I finished the video lectures and the assessments, then that was when I would really focus on the multiple choice questions and the simulations. And then however, throughout that entire process, I was also using the SuperFast material because, obviously as I'm going through these lessons, something that I went over 2 weeks ago may not be sticking with me as much. And so that's when these 5-question multiple choice quizzes really came to be useful, because, every night, if I had 15, 20 minutes of downtime, I would try to take 3 or 4 quizzes. And, I found myself doing that, 5 times a day. So I probably do easily like 100 questions on the SuperFast app, and just whether it was in the morning or the afternoon or right before I went to bed, just to kind of keep things relevant on my mind, so that way I can keep moving forward with new topics through Wiley, but keep everything fresh that I'd already gone over. And so I found that was a pretty effective strategy to have. And then once I finished all of my material on Wiley, I would, really aim to do about 150 to 200 multiple choice questions a day, depending on the exam. Those questions took a little bit longer to go through, so maybe it was closer to the 150. But for some of the other ones that are more just principle based and not necessarily calculations and so forth that take a little while, I would aim for closer to 200 probably. And then in the meantime, the simulations, I would initially on FAR, I would try to do a couple here and there just to more so like understand like the ways they could ask the questions, but not necessarily as a learning like the material kind of thing, because on the simulations there's just so many ways they can ask you questions, and I wanted to familiarize myself with those more so than trying to learn things, and really use the multiple choice to kind of hammer home those principles, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. The MCQs for kind of learning the, I don't know, like the why behind things, like the conceptual side of things, and then your sims you were mostly just using to get familiar with the format, like how to actually fill them out if it's presented like this or presented like this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so going back to your first month and a half, are you saying that your study session would basically consist of watching the Wiley video lecture for a topic, and then just throughout the day you kind of used our study tools, or would you do like the video lecture and the questions for that lesson in Wiley, or what specifically was your
so I would
process?
wake up in the morning, and I'm fortunate because I work remotely, so I don't have to worry about commuting to and from work. And so it would make it easier to get about 2 hours of studying in every morning. And so I would try to fit in as many video lectures. And after so while the video lectures are going on, I'm taking my own notes. But then once that was done, I would take the assessment with each lesson. And so that was a great kind of initial way to go over material and then, expose yourself to multiple choice questions. And then throughout the day, that was always my aiming point with studying for Wiley, was to get those 2 hours in the morning. And then I would, whether I had 10 minutes before a meeting or some downtime during lunch or in the evening, I would try to find, a little time here and there to get into that SuperfastCPA app and just take those 5-question quizzes. And so I found myself probably doing easily like 10 to 15 quizzes throughout the day. And some of it was material that I might have gone over already, and some of it might have been things that I hadn't gone over yet. But either way, it was good exposure, whether we're keeping items relevant in my mind or we're kind of, preparing me for things that are to come in future lessons. So either way, it was beneficial for sure.
I was just going to ask you that exact question. Actually, for like the last 5 minutes, I was wanting to ask you that. Because that's, again, going back to when someone first signs up, if they're not... we do that free 1-hour webinar that explains our whole rationale for like how our study tools are set up. But a lot of times people purchase before they've watched that. So they're kind of thinking it's going to be like a normal review course where they can choose topics, set up a quiz the way they want it. And our quizzes are just 5 questions from everything for a reason. So I was going to ask you just... Yeah, did you feel like that was helpful, or you kind of got the idea of why that is? Because like you just said, if it's something you've already covered, it's re-review. But if not, because our questions are kind of simplified, you're just kind of getting a big picture introduction to new topics that you're going to eventually get to.
Yeah, no, exactly. I really enjoyed the fact that some of it was new material that I hadn't gone over yet, because even though we're not necessarily learning in depth when we're just going through like a multiple choice question or two, it's still kind of almost mentally just preparing you for what's to come, I guess. And so then when you get there, it's like, oh, you kind of connect the dots between the material that you're going over versus the questions that you had seen before. And so I thought that was a really good way to kind of fill the gap when going through this, for sure.
Okay. And I guess you kind of said this, so you would print out the review notes, and would you use those in your... Well, I guess, how would you use those? You would watch the Wiley lectures, do the Wiley questions. Where would your printed review notes come in? typically?
So usually the way I think I went through the notes altogether 3 or 4 times for each exam. And so I would usually kind of go through the notes to begin with before I even start the Wiley material. I might take a day or two to just read through it and just kind of, basically just gain some exposure to these new topics that we're about to go through. And I thought that was a good way to kind of introduce myself to these items. And then I would probably go through all the Wiley lectures. And so about a month later, I might go back through the actual written notes. And then the day before every exam that I've taken, I've actually reviewed the notes. I thought that was like a great day before review, especially because the notes are set up in a way that it gives you the information that you need without being so overbearing. So it doesn't, depending on the exam, I think the one that had the longest, length in terms of pages was reg, if I recall correctly. But most of them, you could get through within an hour or two, and that was a great way to just kind of rehash everything the day before the exam, I felt like.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So you basically, I've kind of heard those ideas separately. Yeah, I've heard before someone would be like, every section I would just read the notes all the way through before I started my lessons in FAR or whatever. So it sounds like you did that. And then there's kind of the day-to-day use for re-review or just and you kind of said you would use your printed out notes as almost your own set of notes, like you would mark things up and add little comments.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm sorry, I keep looking to the right because I see my binder with my printed off notes right there. But
yeah, I've got 2 screens. I'm doing the same thing. No worries.
So it was just super helpful to be able to look at different topics and just write like little things to remember things, whether it's acronyms or something, just so that way you could kind of remember certain items. And I don't have anything specific. I remember, writing down acronyms as I was going through notes, so that way I can remember the order of certain things. But yeah, just having those notes available and being able to review those on a physical copy rather than just electronically was helpful for me. And I probably would have gone through these notes more, but I actually used the audio notes a lot. So throughout this process, because I got burnt out initially, I tried to be really diligent in terms of making sure I was still having a social life, still, being physically active and exercising. So when I would go to the gym or I would go on the treadmill, I would, I put my headphones in and I would listen to audio notes. And so that in that instance, that would be helpful too, because I would try to gauge that to where if I went over a certain thing on my Wiley lesson, I would take the audio notes that were closely associated with it. So that way it was just kind of reinforcing what I had learned at that point. So I think, both of those items in conjunction were extremely helpful for me.
Yeah. Yes. That's another thing I say to people is using the study tool, that it's important to use all 3 study tools each day, because it hits your brain differently, the review notes compared to the audio notes or the quizzes. So I wanted to ask you about the whole having a life aspect. So obviously I think that's really important, and it makes this whole process more sustainable, over the months that it takes. So you would do your 2 hours in the morning. So when you went from your month and a half of covering all the videos, and then you switched to kind of covering all the MCQs, was that just your format? 2 hours in the morning, mini sessions throughout the day with our study tools, and then the evenings you'd kind of have to just have a normal life, so to speak?
Yeah, exactly. Because by getting all of that done throughout the day, if I went out and went to dinner with my wife or hung out with friends, I wouldn't feel guilty that I didn't get that work in throughout the day. So I felt like that was really important for me, and just, having longevity, because even if you're trying to get through this process as quickly as you can, it's still going to be a relatively long process. It's not something that's just going to, be a quick turnaround within a month. I've heard of people who have passed 4 exams within a month, but it's not very common, especially for people who are working full time as well. So I think by still maintaining that social aspect, I was able to, as you alluded to, have that longevity and mentally just, not be burnt out, so to speak. Especially after the first time when I was burnt out, I didn't really, granted, it was different back then for me because the job that I had, I was in office back then. After COVID, everything kind of transitioned. A lot of things transitioned to remotely, and so that was definitely important for my ability to study, because that basically took out an hour of commuting every day, so you could reallocate that time to apply towards studying and preparing for exams. But so back before COVID, when I was studying, I would have to be in the office by like 7:30 to 8, and so if I was getting 2 hours of studying in the morning, I was waking up so early, and by the time you get done with work and you commute home, you'd just be exhausted and you would want to go to bed. And so I didn't maintain relationships and friendships and for those several months that I was studying. So that was another reason why I kept pushing this process aside, was that I didn't have a very good experience over those several months, and so I didn't want to have to go back through that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, right. If it's like you wake up, go to work, and then try to study for 4 hours after work, that's your entire life. And for a lot of people, they do that, and then they fail the exam, so it's like not even working. So then they're obviously questioning, why am I even doing this? Yeah, it gets pretty miserable pretty fast. So you mentioned taking notes on the notes, but did you have a separate note-taking system, or did you use flashcards or some form of like putting things you struggle to understand in your own words?
So I actually, for when I was going through all of my Wiley assessments, I would just on flashcards, I would write down like with each lesson. So on each lesson, I would do like the title of the lesson, I would do the date that I was going over it, and then I would just write down like important topics that I felt I needed to have. And so by the end of it, you'd have a stack of flashcards that thick, and it was just kind of a good way to kind of flip through as you were leading up to the exam, just to refresh on certain topics. But that was good in terms of gaining exposure and keeping everything fresh. But ultimately, I felt like, while those notes were helpful, I still felt like the multiple choice was really where you reinforced everything and gained probably the most knowledge.
Yeah, there's something about seeing a question, like pressing a button, and then seeing if you were right or wrong, and like, okay, what am I missing here? I don't know. I think that's like by far the most effective way overall. Like MCQs are the best learning tool overall. You mentioned how you use the Sims. So you said you a month and a half to cover all the videos, and then to cover all the MCQs was another how long?
So it wasn't necessarily that I was just trying to cover all the MCQs. It was more so like through Wiley, I would do like the test bank. And so you can set it up to where you can, each exam has either 4 or 5 sections on it. And so I would take, maybe a 20 or 30 question testlet over one section. And then I would actually keep a spreadsheet where I would, gauge my progress. And so I would know how well I'm scoring each day in what specific section. So that way I can know kind of what area I'm performing well in, where I'm struggling. And so that would kind of, and reinforce like which area I needed to focus on as I'm leading up to the exams. And for me personally, it was always, once I kind of was averaging about an 82 to 85 across the board for all these sections, that was when I felt just mentally comfortable, I guess, with scheduling the exams. So most of the time that would take about roughly a month of just multiple choice questions. So it wasn't necessarily going through all of it. It was just, feeling comfortable with the material and performing well over a certain period of time.
Okay, so you finish the videos, and then let's say that the Wiley's divided into 5 sections. So when you start your MCQ process, you go in on day 1 of that, and you take 20 or 30 questions from section 1, and then is the next day section 2, and then the next day section 3? Or do you drill down based on how you scored on subtopics of section 1?
So what I ended up doing was I would do 20 to 30 questions per section, but I would do, each section every day. So that's how I'd get up to like my 150 questions or so. So I might do 30 questions for each section, each of the 5 sections, and hit 150. And even if I got, a 50 or a 60 in section 1, I would still move on to section 2, because my mindset was like, even though I'm not where I need to be, I still need to kind of gauge where I am in these other sections before I can, really start moving forward. So that way I didn't just focus on one area and, let any other area kind of fall behind. And also it wasn't if I did section 1 first, where I felt comfortable with that before moving on to section 2, then I might be focusing on section 2 and then section 3, and then some of the stuff that I learned in section 1 and 2 that made me feel comfortable, that might have kind of fallen off by that point. So that way everything was just being reinforced throughout that entire process rather than just focusing on one thing at a time.
Gotcha. So if you're trying to hit 100 to 150 MCQs a day, you're fitting all that in just the morning 2 hours?
Normally, yes. I mean, again, it depends on the section, right? Because there's some sections that, like FAR, where it might be multiple calculations that are needed just for one question. It might take 3 to 4 minutes, but then you might have something on like reg or audit where it's just like a principle related item where you can see it and answer it in like 20 seconds. So, I would try to get as many as I could in the morning within that 1.5 to 2 hour window. And if I didn't get to the point where I needed to, then I would try to find maybe some time during lunch or maybe 30 more minutes in the evening, whatever it might be, just to kind of hit that quota on the day.
Yeah. And I think that's a really valuable thing, is kind of like a benchmark, because it's easy to spend 2 or 3 hours, but if you get sidetracked or like go on this goose chase for a specific thing, or you're like watching the videos, 2 hours goes by. Anyways, once you're working on questions, having a certain amount each day, then you just know, that you've covered X amount of questions, versus doing 15 or 20 and getting sidetracked, and you still spend the 2 or 3 hours, but you only got through 20 questions. So kind of putting in the time it takes to hit your numbers each day, I don't know. I think it's obviously like a more effective way of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And by kind of being consistent with that, I told you how I kind of kept my own metrics for how I was scoring for each section. So that way, like every day, you had the bare minimum amount of questions that you were kind of comparing percentage wise. And so, it's not like you scored 100% on one day, but you only did 10 questions, and you do 30 questions the next day, and, average is 65 or something. So that way, it gave me kind of just the consistency that I needed to feel comfortable with the material, I felt like.
Yeah. And it's hard to do that many questions, and, you get good at answering MCQs, that sounds maybe weird, again, to someone who's not deep into this process, but you have to be good at the MCQs to do well on test day. Because the big thing with the sims is having as much time as possible, to just sit there and digest the exhibits and figure out. It just takes time to like deal with the sims. So was that kind of your experience on test day? You got through the MCQs relatively quickly and easily so that you had a bunch of time for the sims?
Yeah, so I remember all of the exams that I've done. Well, I've taken all exams now. The last one that I have is BEC, and I took that about a week ago, so I'm still waiting on the results of that one.
Okay.
But all of the exams, my aiming point going into it was always to try to finish the multiple choice questions at least within an 1.5 hours, if not less time. So that way, just ample time for simulations. Because I remember my first exam that I passed was FAR this past March, and I finished multiple choice questions relatively quick, and there was one really long simulation, and I felt like it took like 30 or 40 minutes. It was a really long, I don't remember what it was specifically, but it took a long time, and I ended up turning the exam in with like 15 minutes left, I think, which was, after finishing the multiple choice questions so early, that was not something that I was kind of forecasting. But if I hadn't been able to get through the multiple choice that quickly, I probably would have been really struggling to turn it in on time. So that was the only exam that I was really ever pressed up against the time barrier. But you really reinforce those multiple choice questions so that way you can get through them and focus on the other areas that require a little bit more of your time and attention.
Yeah, right. It's just, you don't know. And the way they changed, like when I took the exams, you got all the sims at the same time, so you could click through all of them. But now you have to like fully submit each little mini testlet. So like you might have a really hard one, or you just don't know what's gonna appear in those other two sim testlets. So yeah, like moving on is a huge strategy or time thing. Okay, so one question I've been meaning to ask is, so your first attempt, the 4 years ago or whatever, and then you start this new process, did you feel like immediately, or I don't know, within a few weeks that it was working better? Or was it only until you took your first section with this new way and found out you passed that confirmed, like, okay, this is working better? Or did you just have a sense that while you were in it, it was already working better?
It's funny that you asked that. So, because people have asked me kind of similar questions in my office as they're trying to get through the study process as well, and it's hard to say because you get back into it and you feel like you're making progress and doing well, but when it comes to it, like the only thing that it comes down to is the body of work and the effort that you put in for this, and even you can think that you're doing what you need to do and still maybe come up short. And so I think once I've passed that first exam, it kind of gave me the confidence to, my methods are probably working. The amount of time that I'm spending on everything is probably sufficient. And so I just kind of kept that same study, just the same study regimen over the next three exams after that. So to answer, I was kind of all over the place with that answer, but it's really tough to kind of get confident with this exam because you can feel confident going into the exam, but you never know what you're going to get. It's the luck of the draw on these exams. So you might have topics that you either know really well or maybe you don't know them really well. And so the only thing that I really ever felt confident in was the body of work that I had done to get to that point. And so as long as you kind of have a plan in place and you keep following that, that's really all you can do. And so I think, once you pass your first exam and you realize what works for you, then that kind of sets the foundation for the rest of your process.
Yeah, right. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the biggest confirmation that what you're doing is working, like the real score on the real exam. So,
and the other thing that I would even throw in there is, even now, so I mentioned that I'm still waiting for BEC results, and every exam that I've walked out of since I restarted studying, so I've passed FAR on. It wasn't my first attempt overall, but it was my first time like restudying 4 years later, and then I passed audit on my first attempt, and then I passed reg on my first attempt. And so every exam that I walked out of, I didn't necessarily feel confident that I passed, but all of the grades that I've gotten were not things that were borderline. Like I got an 85 on FAR, I got an 82 on reg, and I think a 79 on audit. So everything was, pushing the 80s range, then hovering around that 75. But even then, like I would walk out of the exams thinking like, oh no, I think I might have to reschedule this exam and take it again. So I don't know if there's really ever a good way to gauge like how you performed on an exam, because we tend to overanalyze things.
Right.
So
no, there's not. I mean, I've talked to people that were positive. They like basically aced an exam and then they failed it. And then people that are like, I bet I got like a 30 on that and passed it. I mean, it's so subjective. You do not know until you get the score. But with your new process going 3 for 3, did you kind of feel the same coming out of BEC? Just there wasn't anything in there that was a complete surprise, or I know I didn't bomb any like major portion of it, so like I should be pretty good.
The term that I kept explaining to my friends was cautious optimism. I was like, I think that there's a decent chance that I passed, but I don't want to say outright that I did. So, I mean, we'll see in the next few days. I actually get my results back tomorrow evening, so, we'll see what happens then. But, the other thing, too, with the exams that you kind of tend to overthink about is, so my sister and father are both CPAs, and so, they've definitely given me tips and tricks on what they went through. And my sister has spoken about it. It's kind of a myth. I don't know if it's ever been confirmed, but like if you perform really well on one test, that the exam might make the second one a little bit harder. And so I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but because
a full separate, like you're saying that it would be if you did really well on FAR, within
the same exam. So for instance,
the testlet.
If you do really well on the first multiple choice testlet, they might make the second one a little bit harder questions. But if you didn't,
no, that is a thing.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and I tend to overthink about things like that. And so, like, when I took BEC, I felt like I did really well on the first test. And then there were like 3 or 4 questions on the second test. And I'm like, what am I even looking at? And so then we get to the simulations, and I felt like I breezed through those. And then I get to the written response questions, and I felt like I breezed through those too. And so I get to the end of it, I'm thinking, like, did I just perform well, like, on the multiple choice stuff? And then I, didn't do so well on the second test, and then they gave me easier sims and written response questions. And so I don't know what the answer is on that. We'll see. But it's just something where when you're trying to gauge how well you did, it's very hard because there's so many different nuances to this exam, and you just really never know.
Right. And I think on that, that is one of those things that people get really hung up on. And like almost during the exam, if like subjectively, like they know that that's the case. If you do well on the first testlet, the second one won't be medium difficulty, it will be hard difficulty. But if they don't think that they moved into the hard level, then they were like, oh, I blew it, like in the exam. I've heard that from a lot of people. So they kind of like get mentally defeated just because they don't think they moved from medium to hard. And I don't know. Yeah. So it's like, it's kind of good to know how the exam works, but at the same time, you don't want to get so wrapped up in those kind of details that it throws you off when you're actually taking the exam. The other thing is, if you know the material pretty well, it'd be really hard to tell if it's harder or not, because like if you know it, it wouldn't really seem different. I don't know. It's just really subjective.
Yeah, that's why it's just so hard. And I tend to overanalyze things to begin with. And so that's why when I look back at exams, I could never just really give an estimate for my score. I would always just be like, it's probably like 69 to 85 range. You never know.
Yeah. So the score release, isn't that today? Or is Texas not a, what's it called? A NASBA state?
No, it is. So I took my exam on, let's see, it was the day before the Super Bowl on February 11th, that Saturday. And so I thought on NASBA it had said that, so usually it'll give a date and then it'll end up actually being posted the night before.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the date was the 22nd for this window. And so I'm expecting that it would be available tomorrow night.
Okay.
And then the board would ratify that score later on.
Yeah, you're probably right. Okay, so tomorrow you'll know. All right. Well, let me know how you do.
Yes, sir.
I'm confident it's going to be a pass. So you're not officially done, but you probably will be by tomorrow. But now that once you started passing the sections and you're this close, most likely completely done. I mean, how does it feel to be... Okay, like let's say you pass tomorrow. How does it feel to be done finally?
It's going to feel incredible. It's something that, I actually turned 29 later this week, and this has been a goal of mine since I was 19 years old. And so the fact that, it's something that I've been working towards for about 10 years, it's hard to put it into words, what that means. And the fact that, my father's a CPA and my sister's a CPA, and just to, have that and be able to move forward in my career. And obviously everyone pursues this because they want to extend their career and be as successful as they can and support their families. And, that's the same for me as anyone else. And so, to be able to just have my wife live a better life and future family, that, I can't wait for that. It's been a lot of effort to get to this point, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. Yeah, it is awesome. It's like the biggest relief in the world to just be... It's almost weird because, especially if you study in the morning, you're just so used to getting up every day and doing that, and then that's taken away, and I don't know. Just work feels like life's on easy mode after that.
Yeah, this last week has been great because, I still wake up early because my body's so used to it, but instead of studying, I went to the gym or I went for a walk or something, and that was always a great way to start the day. And it'll be nice to kind of get back onto that same schedule again. But there's still like that. I don't know what you actually recommend after you take exams, if you say like, oh, you should keep studying the material until you get your results back, or if you're like, yeah, maybe take 10 days off until you get the results back. But I always kind of took those 10 days off to like clear my head a little bit. And fortunately, I passed those first 3 exams on the first attempt this second time around. But I guess that was a risk by not keeping the material relevant and fresh on my mind. But I think at the same point, there's so much stress that goes into these exams that maybe taking a week off does you well mentally in the long term.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. So for me personally, the way I did it, I always just assumed that I passed, and the next day I would move on to the next section. But talking with a lot of people the last few years, there's just so many personality differences where taking a week off in between exams is a lot more beneficial for that person than immediately going to the next one and like taking no days off. For me, it was just easier, like honestly easier to just no days off ever. Because I would feel like one day off would just throw me off completely. But it's a totally different, I've learned that slowly, like, because I would kind of be really rigid in how I would recommend things to people, and I don't know. You just realize that people deal better with maybe taking that week off or whatever. And clearly, it's worked for you. So it's just, if you're passing sections, you can do whatever you want, That's kind of the bottom line.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, that we've almost gone an hour. That went by really fast. So I don't want to take up much more of your time. So the thing I always ask last is, even if it's stuff we already covered, what would be your top 3 tips for people still trying to figure out, like an effective study process or get their study process down?
So my first tip that I would give someone is to just be patient with this process. It's really easy to get your material through Wiley or Becker or wherever, and they send you all your books and your notes, and you look at each book and it's about that thick, and you realize all the information that you still have to go through, and you're like, man, this is only one exam. I still have 3 more after this. So it's really easy to think about everything that you have to go through to get to this end goal of becoming a CPA, but just really focus on the task at hand and try to be present and just put a plan in place and follow that as best as you can. And at the end of it, hopefully everything works out well, but just try to, again, don't be overwhelmed by everything that you have to go through. And this is going to take some significant time out of your personal life probably. So just understand that going into this process and just be patient with it would be the first tip. The second tip that I would have would be, and this was something that I learned after my second exam, would be to always try to schedule your exams as close to the end of the window as you can, so that way it's the shortest turnaround time for getting your results. For instance, I took my audit exam, I think it was mid-July, somewhere between the 16th and 20th, and I didn't get my results back until like August 11th or 12th. And so that was roughly 3 weeks that I was just kind of sitting there like, what am I supposed to do? I felt like if I started studying new material, like I didn't know if that was arrogant of me to assume that I passed, or if I should keep studying old material just to keep it relevant on my mind. And fortunately I did pass, but for someone who might be brushing up against that 18-month window, that's 3 weeks that they could save down the line. So that would definitely be a topic a tip that I would suggest for someone. And then I think my last tip would just be to the extent that it's possible to maintain a social life and a life outside of work and studying. I kind of mentioned earlier how I got burnt out my first time studying, and by the end of when I took FAR and got a 72 and I failed, I was just like, I don't want to go through this again, and I pushed it to the back burner for 3 or 4 years. And so I think looking back, if I had taken a little bit more time to go have dinner with friends, go play a round of golf, whatever it might be, do things that you still enjoy, so that way life doesn't constantly feel like a burden during this process. And it's really cliche to say this, but like being physically active, definitely does help with the burnout. So, find an hour during lunch to go to the gym or in the evening or something, and just keep that schedule in addition to your study schedule, because it'll definitely help in the long run.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge it's a huge thing. Like whatever keeps you sane, you have to like make time to do that. I mean, on the podcast here, I've talked to people who are like, I made it a priority to like save an hour to play video games every night, you know, like whatever your thing is. I do. I think that's a huge thing. So yeah. All right. Well, yeah. So we kind of went through everything. I appreciate you doing the call. It was fun to meet you, chat, hear your story. I'm pretty sure by tomorrow you're going to have confirmed that you're done with this. So
I hope so. I'll send you an email one way or the other.
Yeah. So I'll give you the congrats in advance. But yeah.
It was a pleasure meeting you as well, and I appreciate you having me on here. It was fun to talk about my experience.
Yeah, and it'll, I think you're, again, like I said in the beginning, everyone kind of has a specific, at least one unique tip they gave, and yours was different in that you would do kind of a video lecture segment to like get through all the material. I mean, you were doing the mini session thing at the same time all day, but work through the videos first and then the questions. And, I hear from people all the time that are like, I have to watch those videos. And so that's just one version of how to do that. Anyways, all right. I don't want to take up much more of your day. So I appreciate you doing the call. I'm glad you found us. I'm glad you feel like it was helpful. And again, in advance, congrats on being done.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for this product you put together. Wiley was definitely helpful, but I think this definitely was something that kind of took me a little bit further to kind of get me over the hump in a lot of ways. So I do appreciate you putting this all together.
So that was the interview with Jonathan. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm sure you found that very helpful and motivating, especially the emphasis on maintaining balance, doing some of the things that you still like doing or just that you find rejuvenating throughout this process. And again, that's only possible if you really get your study process nailed down to where every hour that you spend is highly effective and efficient. That way you're getting through lessons quickly, you are retaining and understanding more of what you're studying. And if you need help with that, make sure to watch one of those free study training webinars. The link will be in the description of this episode. And if you're finding these episodes helpful, please take a second, share it with someone you know who's also working on their CPA exams, as these interviews are the most helpful free resource available anywhere for helping you figure out your CPA study process. If you're watching this on YouTube, please take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and then leave a comment down below about one takeaway or one idea you got from Jonathan's interview. So thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.